Every crime leaves a trail, not just of evidence, but of ignored signs, unheard voices, and unanswered questions. This isn't a podcast about gore or headlines. It's about what went wrong and why no one stopped it. I'm Johnny Black. This is Unsaid Case Files. Jonestown, the Illusion of Paradise. On November 18th, 1978, a U.S. congressman lay dying on a dirt airstrip in the jungles of Guyana. His name was Leo Ryan. He had come here to investigate reports of abuse, imprisonment, and fear inside a remote settlement known as Jonestown. Minutes earlier, his plane had been preparing for takeoff. Then a truck arrived. Gunmen jumped out. Shots rang out. Ryan was struck multiple times and left bleeding in the open air. By the end of the day, more than 900 people would be dead. Over 200 of them were children. This wasn't a sudden tragedy. It was a slow, deliberate collapse, years in the making. This is Jonestown. Jim Jones didn't begin as a cult leader. He began as a solution. Born in Indiana, Jones was charismatic, intense, and deeply obsessed with power from a young age. He preached racial equality at a time when segregation was still the norm. He spoke about community, shared wealth, and justice for the poor. And people listened. In 1955, he founded the People's Temple, an organization that blended Christianity, socialism, and absolute loyalty to its leader. Jones claimed religion was a tool. What mattered, he said, was socialism, equality, obedience for the greater good. Behind closed doors, though, Jones admired authoritarian figures: Stalin, Lenin, Mao, even Hitler. He studied how they controlled populations, how they created enemies, how fear unified followers. And slowly, subtly, Jones began to position himself not just as a preacher, but as the only source of truth. By the late 1960s, criticism followed him. Accusations of abuse, financial exploitation, manipulation. So Jones did what he would do again and again. He moved. The People's Temple relocated to California, first to Ukiah, then Los Angeles, and finally San Francisco. Here, Jones found something far more valuable than faith. He found political power. The temple became deeply involved in local politics. They mobilized voters, filled buses, supported candidates. When George Moscone was elected mayor, Jim Jones was rewarded with a position as chairman of the San Francisco Housing Authority. Jones was now photographed with governors, assemblymen, even the First Lady of the United States. To the outside world, he was a progressive leader. To his followers, he was becoming something else entirely. Inside the temple, discipline intensified. Public humiliations, beatings, forced confessions, children separated from parents. Those who questioned Jones were branded traitors, tools of the government, or worse. By the mid-1970s, reporters and defectors were closing in, and Jones was running out of places to hide. In 1973, Jones found his answer: Guyana, a small English-speaking socialist country with a weak infrastructure and a government he believed he could influence. Jones pitched the idea of a self-sustaining agricultural commune, a socialist paradise free from American racism, capitalism, and persecution. In reality, it was isolation. Jonestown was carved out of jungle land with poor soil, far from major cities, near a disputed border. Once people arrived, leaving became nearly impossible. Passports were confiscated. Immigration rules were manipulated. The only communication with the outside world was a shortwave radio, controlled by the temple. By 1977, as media investigations intensified in the U.S., Jones ordered a mass migration. Hundreds fled San Francisco overnight. By 1978, nearly 900 people lived in Jonestown, overcrowded, watched, trapped. Jonestown was not a paradise. People worked from early morning until evening, 6 days a week. Food was scarce, often just rice, beans, and greens. Medical care was inadequate. Jones lived in a small house, but had access to better food and drugs. And there were drugs. Members who resisted were injected with Thorazine, Valium, and other sedatives. Punishments were brutal. Adults were locked in a tiny plywood box. Children were lowered into wells overnight, sometimes upside down. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. Escape attempts were met with beatings or drugging. Jones spoke constantly over loudspeakers, day and night, reading propaganda, conspiracy theories, and warnings of enemies closing in. The United States, he said, wanted them dead. The CIA, the FBI, the press. And then there were the White Nights. During White Nights, Jones would summon the entire community to the pavilion. Guards surrounded them, weapons visible. Jones would present choices: fight the invading forces, flee into the jungle, or commit what he called revolutionary suicide. On more than one occasion, followers, including children, were given cups of red liquid and told it was poison. They drank. They waited. Then Jones laughed. It was a test, a rehearsal. The message was clear. Next time, it will be real. By 1978, Jonestown had been receiving shipments of cyanide for years. Officially, it was for cleaning gold. Unofficially, it was insurance. Back in the United States, families were terrified. Letters stopped. Phone calls were monitored. Former members came forward with affidavits describing abuse, imprisonment, and rehearsed suicides. They called themselves the concerned relatives. They wrote to the State Department, to the Guyanese government, to Congress. Most officials did nothing. One did. Congressman Leo Ryan. Ryan decided he would go himself. Ryan arrived in Guyana on November 14th, 1978, accompanied by staffers, reporters, and relatives of temple members. When they reached Jonestown, Jones put on a performance. Smiling faces, prepared meals, songs of praise. But cracks appeared quickly. People passed notes to reporters begging for help. Entire families asked to leave. Jones grew visibly agitated. Ryan insisted they leave together, fearing retaliation. But there was only one plane. A second had to be arranged. The delay sealed their fate. On the afternoon of November 18th, Ryan's group gathered at the Port Kaituma airstrip. As they boarded the planes, a temple member named Larry Layton pulled out a gun and began shooting inside one aircraft. At the same time, a dump truck arrived. Armed men opened fire. Ryan was hit. So were reporters. So were defectors. 5 people were killed. Ryan became the first U.S. congressman murdered in the line of duty. Back in Jonestown, Jim Jones knew it was over. Jones gathered the community. He told them the attack would bring retaliation, that their children would be tortured, that there was no escape. He called it revolutionary suicide. In reality, it was mass murder. Cyanide was mixed into a fruit-flavored drink. Children were forced to drink first. Many were injected. Adults who resisted were held down. Guards stood watch, guns raised. Anyone who tried to flee was shot. More than 900 people died in minutes. Jones was found dead with a gunshot wound to the head. The FBI launched one of the largest investigations in its history. Bodies were identified, survivors interviewed. The truth emerged slowly. This was not mass suicide. It was coercion. It was murder. Larry Layton was extradited to the U.S., convicted, and sentenced to life in prison. Jonestown became shorthand for blind obedience, for misplaced trust, for what happens when warnings are ignored. Jonestown didn't begin with poison. It began with promises, with silence, with a man who convinced people that he was the only thing standing between them and the end of the world. And by the time they realized he was the danger, there was nowhere left to run. I'm Johnny Black. Thank you for listening. And remember, the most important details are often the ones no one says out loud.